Okay, thanks for joining us today on the presentation about cloud security. Even though it's been around for a while now, a few years, which is light years in internet history, we have still get a lot of questions about cloud security, what it is, what actually is the cloud, why are people still moving to it, is there a decline actually in what's happening with cloud computing? It turns out that it's kind of hit its peak as far as how many people are searching on it and looking for information on it, so where we stand with that. So we're going to be covering a lot of different things today, but first let me tell you a little bit about our presenters. Ken Stasiak, he's our CEO of SecureState. He founded the company back in 2001, and so he's been just about every cert that you can have. Been around for a long time, worked at Ernst & Young and so forth. Next is Matt Neely. Matt Neely is our VP of Consulting here at SecureState. He's grown up in a lot of different areas of security, from penetration testing to various types of assessments, risk assessments, 10 years of experience, that type of thing. And then my name is Steve Marshowitz, and I'm the president of SecureState. More so on the business side, I actually grew up more in IT than I did in security, so I have a little bit of flavor on it, but I've been in security now for about 8 years. A little bit about SecureState, just to kind of, in case you aren't familiar with us, don't know who we are, what kind of things we do. We've been in business, like I said, since 2001, where we do work with pretty much every regulation that you've ever heard of in security, and probably a bunch that you haven't. And we do a bunch of different areas. We're one of the largest security companies here in the Great Lakes. We're broken up into 5 different areas. Our first is audit advisory services, and in there we kind of bring in, which is this a part of, we help organizations with their general security, aligning their security programs to security risk management, and then ultimately to enterprise risk management, which has been quite a challenge for a lot of organizations. Next is audit and compliance. We do pretty much every regulation, very much focused in and around security. So we're a qualified security assessor for PCI. We support accounting firms with their SSAE 16 type of things. HIPAA, privacy, we do a lot in privacy now with that. Next is profiling penetration, so our attack and penetration team, ethical hackers, if you will. They help validate our findings in the types of things that we do, internal and external pen tests, web application security, mobile is big now, obviously. Next is risk management. And risk management really helps with the program component of security. So they're helping with the remediation support. So when we come in and do assessments, we almost always find a bunch of stuff. Everyone has areas they can improve in security. Nobody can spend all the money they need typically to do everything they can, so you have to make risk decisions. And when you do that, you have to build programs, and they're helping the program building, the vulnerability management programs, patch management programs, MSBs, that type, minimum security baselines, that type of thing. And then lastly is incident response. So if you do have an incident, we'll come in and actually help with the eradication of it if need be. We've testified in court. Basically a lot of different things in and around incident response and forensics that we can bring to the table to help you figure things out. A lot of research is going into now in a research and innovation lab with advanced persistent threat and persistent threat modeling. So, so to start off, what do we all want from IT? We all want really something that works. I mean, that's the number one thing. And the biggest reason it's very challenging for organizations, and especially as you see now with smaller companies, mid-sized companies even, that they have to get things done quickly. They don't have the resources. They don't have a time to build an IT staff. As we all know, it's very, very difficult to get stuff that actually works. I always say no software actually works, particularly when you install it. So we all want something that works. We want it to be simple. You just have to know what you want. So all I want to know is, this is what I want it to do. Can it just do this for me? If I wanted a software or something to do or something automated, I just want to know what I want. We definitely want less hassle. We don't want to have to know how to do it, to integrate it, to buy it, manage it, depreciate it, all these different things that you have to worry about with software. We want accountability. Typically from IT, again, it never seems to be anyone's fault. We can't pin it down as to, well, the network guy or the software or the hardware. It's always someone else's fault. So what you get is, sorry, nothing more we can do unless you want to spend a lot more money. So that mantra is getting a little tired, particularly with the CFOs. We definitely want choice. If my staff isn't cutting it, there's not much I can do. It's very difficult for me to replace my whole IT staff. I can't just plug and play with a different set of people. It doesn't work that way. But it would be nice if we had choice. We definitely want it cheaper. Cisco, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, those companies, they own us right now. They are extremely wealthy organizations, and there's got to be better and cheaper ways to do things, which is really interesting in the way things are going, and the problems that they have. And then we want flexibility. If we use more, we'll spend more. If we use less, we want to spend less. We don't want to have these big forklift upgrades that we have to put in a giant piece of another box for just a few more MIPS or whatever it might be. And really, let's face it, dealing with IT just is tough. We really don't like it. We like them, but we don't like dealing with IT. So these are some of the things that we're trying to get out of our IT and staff. So as a result, we look to this cloud term. So just a little background on it. Cloud, in the cloud means it's not in a known or static place. It can be in a lot of different areas, your data, information, how things are traversed. So being in the cloud means it can be anywhere. And we look at cloud computing. It's location-independent computing that you can consume on demand and extends IT's existing capabilities. So breaking it down means you can extend the existing capabilities. So we don't have to do everything all at once. We want to extend what we already have possibly. So, and then we want to do it on demand again. We want that flexibility. And it's independent. It doesn't have to be in our headquarters. We have the backup site. We have lots of different choices in what we look for. So other ways to say it is virtual servers available over the internet, real-time, subscription-based, or pay-per-use service, and then remote computing. So the cloud, we're now all pretty familiar with what the cloud is. We can do our storage at Amazon and Microsoft, and Salesforce hosts some of our apps, and Yahoo we look at, and Google we probably touches our lives in almost every single way that they can possibly get to. Dropbox for storage, that type of thing. So there's a lot of players in the cloud that probably more so personally, but as businesses that we're starting to move towards, that we're really is starting to overtake the way that we actually interact and do things. Clearly, with Apple being a huge a player because of the mobile devices and the iPad and such. So what? What's the reason all this is happening? So, cloud really represents a new way to run IT. And that new way is very enticing. So this is coming. It works, in theory anyway. It's simpler. There's less hassle. You can be accountable. If you don't like the person or the company that you're dealing with, you can switch much more easily than you ever could have passed. You can hold them accountable. You can put guarantees in your contracts for uptime and so forth. It's certainly cheaper. What we're seeing a lot of, particularly now, is, and some of the stories that are out there with Oracle, some of the things that you can do on an on-demand basis versus what you would have to do as an organization, it's orders of magnitude. Like you can get something for $7,000 a month that would typically cost you $2 million from Oracle. So we're seeing huge changes, which is going to be tremendously disruptive to those organizations. And clearly it's a lot more flexible. So again, we get to pick and choose and plug and play and put more things together than ever before. So who cares about this? Well, as we were talking about the CFO, the cloud offers a tremendous number of advantages for your CFO or for financing. Right now, when we have to put a lot of money into something, it's very risky. We don't know, are we going to get a return? We can't test it out. When one of the big players comes and pitches us on, hey, you should really get this big package, very, very risky. We don't know if we're really getting the return. Is our company going to use it the right way? It's tough to test. We can do some of those where they give you a choice to come out and test it, but it's very, very difficult and very risky in putting our money towards that. The CFOs want a variable cost business. So again, as we grow, because the economy goes up and down, our business goes up and down, as we grow, we're willing to spend more. As we shrink, we want to spend less in an efficient way without tremendous disruption. Again, it's very tough for layoffs and that type of thing. So when we're looking for variable cost business models, this allows the expenses to rise and fall with that growth. And it's especially interesting for smaller companies, which is why we see entrepreneurship just blowing up all over the place, and intrapreneurship, which is within organizations. So you can actually start a new project on your own, test it, get it to work with very little investment. Whereas before you would have to build business cases and go to your bosses, and then they would have to think about it, and that would take umpteen years to finally get through before they understood what you're talking about. Now with the models that we have, you can test something out and very inexpensively. And if it doesn't work, you scrap it, and there's very little lost. A lot of organizations like the operating expense versus a capital expense, again, those fixed fees that you have to get. And then the time it takes for a business idea to be delivered, to get a return on investment. So their big thing is return on investment. The time that it takes to get a return on investment has decreased tremendously because you can ramp up and the costs are so much cheaper as you're testing this out. So you can see very quickly whether or not you're getting a return on the actions that you put into place. So this is very, very attractive to them from a financial perspective. And whenever we look at finances, of course, that's always going to win out. In IT and security, we can say whatever we want, but at the end of the day, money rules. Money is power, and that power drives action. And that's why these CFOs are going to drive towards this model, whether or not we like it in IT. The cost savings and the benefits of it are just too great. Also, who cares? Of course, we come back to the CIO. They want on-demand self-service. You can unilaterally, across the board, change and provision and bring people up and down based on their own services. You don't have to have those humans involved anymore with every single service provider. CIOs, we want broad network access. So we want to be able to use whatever kind of device that we want without impacting a lot of things that we do, particularly, and as we'll find out later, in and about security. We want to pool our resources. Can we serve multiple consumers using a multi-tenant model? So we'll be able to reuse that or get less or be able to use less hardware and serve more people. Rapid elasticity. Same thing the CFO wants. We want to scale out and in. They're pushing on us to reduce costs or ramp up when we grow. We want to be able to do that quickly and easily. And measured service. We want to pay for what we use. So if we use more, we're willing to spend more. It's very, very difficult for us when, again, we have to do these huge forklift upgrades or we have to buy off on a whole new system. It's very, very challenging. So what are some of the trends? IT departments are going to face increased pressure to consolidate, streamline, speed up delivery, cut costs, and will likely see cloud computing. So we're all probably inundated with it now to some degree. We've seen actually a little bit less than would be expected because we have so much investment in the way that we've been doing it. We don't typically change that quickly. It's more of a cultural shift than it is really what the technology can do. And everybody we know now is just absolutely swamped. Anybody that's in the technology business is just absolutely cooked. And this pressure just seems to be increasing. You have to do it faster and faster and faster for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. You have to find different ways to do things. Again, that financial model, even though we don't want to lay people off or we don't want to change what we have or we want to stay with our current sales rep or whatever it may be, we absolutely have to change. We cannot continue to do business the way that we have been. It's just not possible anymore if we want to stay in business. And we've seen tremendous amounts of companies that have risen and fallen and gone out of business in a matter of months. One is just with Google and how they've changed their algorithm. It's put companies out of business already. So just that quickly, you can be up or down, and CFOs and CIOs know that. So really, the role of this IT department shifts into an orchestrator of services, moving stuff around, bringing things in, taking it out, adapting to where the company's going. So you're not so focused on building something up, nurturing it, getting it into the right spot where you need it to be, working with the people, bringing consultants. You're really orchestrating the things that are coming into you, to the organization. You have to be an evaluator of choices. So when we have all these choices, there's this thing called paradox of choice. So we get inundated with too many choices. We don't make any choice because we don't know what to do. So we have to really evaluate our choices in a much different way than we ever had to. Again, you have IBM, Oracle, and Microsoft. That was about it. Now you have unlimited types of choices that you can do for just for databases alone. Not to mention everything else, a freeware that's out there, the different types of apps that are coming out, the ability to create your own software, to develop your own software, without even having to know how to code, really changes quite a bit of what we're able to choose from. And this gives us a freedom, but this freedom is very tough for us as individuals. And this is going to be a big trend going forward, is how do we choose? How do we know which one is best? And then, of course, we have to optimize how these services are being delivered. The business does not want us in IT to wait for them. They don't want to wait for us, They want us to be ready to go when they're ready to go. We have to be quick. We have to be on top of our game when the business is ready, because these business opportunities, they rise and fall quickly. In a month or 2 or 6 months or a year, the window opens and shuts. You have to be able to move quickly. So what's in store? As we're always seeing this with electricity. So when electricity became this utility model where everyone had access to electricity, it changed things unbelievably. So if you look at all the innovation just from electricity, obviously the light bulb, but all the way through to all of our electronics, all of just how it's changed our homes when electricity first was brought into the homes and businesses, it's absolutely brought in a tremendous amount of information, innovation, the appliances, and what have you. And obviously, with information, we can do so much more, and with everyone connected, this innovation is absolutely exploding, and we're seeing a ton of that now. So these things are coming. And with that innovation, we have a lot of security concerns. So this is going to change very, very soon. It is definitely revolutionary. It's just not immediate. It turns out that while the technology can change, our culture and the way that we operate as human beings doesn't. So it's coming. It will absolutely revolutionize the way that we're doing it. Already is. We're seeing with Apple and the apps that they can put out. But from our core IT organizations, the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see drastic changes. It's infiltrating now, but we're going to see drastic changes. Small companies are more easily suited to this change because they don't have quite the investment. So the bigger companies, as you're probably seeing, are taking a little bit longer. The majority of our customers are, larger organizations that care about security. So it is big. It's coming. It's just going to take a while for us to adapt to what that change can bring for us. So some of the numbers, there really aren't any tremendous good numbers. It is building. It goes higher and higher all the time. But at the end of the day, the numbers that are out there seem somewhat meaningless, because even the way that we look at the cloud and how we even understand what the cloud is seems to change quickly between what we had and what we have now. So really, that's my part of it. Again, from a security standpoint, and I'll turn it over to Matt to go through some of the specifics. But what we really see in security is the challenges of addressing all these cloud providers, the third-party apps, how it interacts with our systems, where we move in and out, what we have to expect from those providers. It introduces a lot of security challenges for us, as well as a lot of benefits. And with that, Matt will take over from here and tell you about some of those.
Thank you, Steve. Now we'll dig into first an overview of cloud environments, just kind of refresh, then discuss some of the security issues around cloud computing environments, talk about audits that can be performed against cloud computer environments, audits and assessments, as well as some challenges in that area. So just as a quick refresher, for cloud security environments, generally there are 5 characteristics that define if a service is a cloud service. There is some debate over if it's 5 or 6 or 7 different characteristics. For this, we decided to go with these 5 characteristics. The first one is that it's an on-demand service. Secondly, it has ubiquitous network access. It's location independent with resource pooling and also rapid elasticity, and usually it's a measured service. So it's something where you pay as you go versus you buy a piece of software and just use it based off of that license. So usually it's a pay-as-you-go model. Additionally, there are generally 3 delivery methods that are accepted for cloud-based services. The first one is software as a service, SaaS. Second one is platform as a service. And a third one is infrastructure as a service. And we'll dig into these a little bit later on, giving a better explanation of what these different delivery models mean and how that can impact the security requirements of the environment. Specifically, who holds accountability changes based off of the delivery model. So it's critical to understand which delivery model is being used to figure out who is accountable for the data that's stored in that solution. And then finally, there are a couple different deployment models as well that can be used from private cloud, community cloud, public cloud, and hybrid cloud. And depending on the deployment model used as well, that could also influence the security requirements of the system. And with all these, it's critical also to take in mind the data that will be stored in the system. Because, for instance, highly regulated, confidential data, personally identifiable information, that type of data will have definitely higher security requirements than if you're just using a cloud to host a brochureware website or more public-based information. So again, it's critical to understand not only the information that's being stored there, but how it's being used in the cloud infrastructure. So a very big issue with cloud security that needs to be addressed is who holds accountability of the data of the systems that are stored in a cloud environment when using a cloud provider. And as a general rule, we break it down to basically 5 layers of a system. There's basically the application layer, the web app database server layer, computing layer, network layer, and storage layer. Depending on if you're using software as a service, infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, can impact who has accountability over the different parts of the application. And the key here is when an application is hosted in-house in a traditional sense by a client, that company will hold accountability for all layers of the application. When you start to pull in third parties, such as in a cloud provider model, you then get into cases where accountability starts to get divided up between which layer. And this becomes critical if there's a service level agreement that isn't met, if there's downtime, if there's a breach, those type of areas. It's critical to understand who has accountability at which level to figure out who is responsible for securing and maintaining that level in the environment. So a couple things to look at. Just a reminder, it's important to clearly define who is accountable for the various layers. It should definitely be done in a written legal document. So if there are problems in the future, it can be referred back to determine exactly who is accountable for which section. And the other key thing to note is outsourcing accountability does not remove all risks. So one example would be if even if all 5 layers are outsourced to a cloud service provider, if that application is breached, there could still be additional risks that flow back onto the original corporate entity which outsourced that information to the cloud provider. One big area to look at is things like reputational risks. Your clients, if your client data is compromised, your clients are mostly going to come back to you opposed to the cloud provider wanting to know why that data was compromised, and will blame you for the data being compromised, not so much the cloud provider, because you were the ones who the data was provided to. So again, it's important to understand that even when you are outsourcing parts of it, that doesn't necessarily mean you're outsourcing all the risks, which is why it's important to understand what controls are in place and how the cloud providers are securing their environments. With accountability as well, it's critical to understand it from a point of view of various regulatory standards. Key ones to look at are PCI, understanding which layers of the environment where cardholder data will be stored, processed, those type of items. It's important to understand that to figure out who holds responsibility for securing that data, especially when it comes to being PCI compliant. And the accountability aspect can have strong impacts when it comes to things like PADSS compliance and PCI DSS compliance. So here we have an example of in a traditional software as a service accountability model. Basically, you have the cloud provider, which is accountable for running all aspects of the environment, from the application down to the storage. Generally, accountability falls to the cloud provider. The customer itself uses it as a service, will store data in it, but generally accountability lies in the cloud provider. With platform as a service, usually the application itself is the responsibility of the cloud consumer to maintain that application. So in terms of patching that application, administering that application, usually that is the responsibility of the cloud consumer, where the bottom layers now fall onto the cloud provider. Now, one note when looking at these diagrams, in reality, most applications do not have such hard, fast lines between them as you will see in these diagrams, but this at least serves as an example of how the environments could be broken up, and it's important, again, to clearly define what those boundaries are. So as you're assigning accountability to them and who is responsible for which portions of the architecture, that is clearly defined. And next up, infrastructure as a service. In this case, usually the top two layers are handled by the customer. They hold accountability for making sure that they are secured and operating properly. So you take the application layer. In addition, on top of that, there are things like the server, app, and database servers as well. But still, below that, you have the environment in terms of the actual computing hardware, software, if it's a virtual environment. But the computing environment, the network environment, and storage environment is usually, again, handled by the cloud provider. So now I've had a brief overview of the different types of cloud environments that can occur, where accountability lies. I want to talk a little bit about some specific security concerns regarding cloud providers and cloud solutions. First one to look at is making sure you have a right to audit. When you're putting data into a third-party systems, into a cloud provider system, it's important that you have written into the contract the right to audit those systems to make sure that controls are being applied that meet your standards. You can perform the testing that's required of that. So this is a critical area to make sure that is included in the contract language. In addition to the right to audit itself, it's important to have SLAs in place of when an audit needs to occur, when do you need to notify them the audit's going to occur, how much lead time you need to give them before the audit can start. Additionally, when issues are discovered during the audit, there needs to be SLAs put in place in the initial contract that say when a critical issue is discovered, the cloud provider will remediate that issue in X amount of time. Additionally, it could be important to define what is a critical issue, what is a medium severity issue, because oftentimes a critical issue to one person may not be a critical issue to another provider. Next up, it's important to validate accountability. Going back to the slide before, it's important to make sure you understand the various layers of the cloud solution and figure out who's accountable for which layer itself. The easiest way to perform this, the way we recommend, is to perform a data flow analysis to map out the layers in the environment and see how data flows through the environment. Once you have that map established, you can then start to define, okay, this area here is handled by the cloud provider, this area here is handled by us, and start to figure out exactly who's responsible for what areas. Then it's important to clearly document the controls that each party is responsible for in these areas. So that way, when an audit does occur, you can make sure that the proper controls are in place from both the cloud provider's point of view as well as your point of view to make sure the data itself is protected. And then finally, validate the controls that have been implemented. And this validation should occur against their environment as well as your environment as well. If the cloud provider has all the controls in place and has their environment well secured, but your environment that feeds into that is not well secured, then that could also obviously provide some security problems for the application as a whole. So we want to make sure across the entire environment the controls are properly applied. Next up, look at data segmentation. Again, this can be done by performing a data flow analysis to determine how your data is moving through the environment. For each data and storage and transmission point, you want to figure out how that data is being protected at that point. What sort of encryption is in place, what sort of authentication, logging, monitoring, those type of details are in place to make sure the data is being properly protected as it moves through the system. And then again, also list and evaluate the controls used to segment your data from other users in the environment. With a cloud environment, oftentimes data will be stored on anything from shared servers to shared storage arrays, crossing shared networks. You want to make sure there are proper controls in place to ensure that as your data traverses that network, it cannot be inadvertently sent to another provider. Other providers cannot see that data. basically making sure that your private data remains private when it goes through that cloud environment. Next up, look at who has access to your data. If a vendor is required to support part or all your cloud application, they're going to need access to your data, access to the application so they can support it. It's critical to understand how that access occurs, what sort of authentication, authorization, and logging occurs when access is needed. We've seen cases where support people can access the data basically at their own discretion, which depending on the type of data that's stored in the application may be fine. We've seen other cases where the support personnel actually need to get permission from the client before they can access the data. And that permission can be in terms of just a procedural control, where they have to email the client, and once they get approval, they can access the data. But there's no technical controls to stop them. There are some cases where the client actually has to go in, allow support to access their data through the administrative interface. So it's important to understand how that access control is maintained so that support personnel themselves are only given access when they need it to your data and you still retain control over it. It's also important to understand what sort of background checks the provider goes through for the data. So are there support personnel put through background checks that match your requirements for background checks in terms of your environment for accessing that type of sensitive data? So you want to make sure that those type of controls are also in place to make sure the proprietor is taking the steps needed to make sure the personnel that can access your data are properly vetted. Data encryption key management is another key area. Encryption is a technology that's often used in cloud environments to protect data as it moves through the cloud, is stored in the cloud, and processed by the cloud systems. So making sure that the encryption is, first of all, using trusted, proven algorithms is critical. You want to make sure they're not using homegrown algorithms, but actual algorithms that have been tested in the public space. So triple DES, RSA, encryption, proven elliptical curve, AES encryption, proven algorithms need to be used in the environment. The other key is to make sure the keys are properly being managed. We've seen cases where all data that moves into a cloud provider is encrypted, but they're all encrypted using the same encryption key, no matter if it's client A or client B. So you want to make sure that the encryption keys are properly segmented based off of your client needs, and then those keys are also properly stored. Because if an encryption key is improperly stored, an attacker needs to gain access to the encryption key, obtain the encryption key, decrypt the data, it provides very little value. So making sure there's proper key management is also a critical step that's often overlooked when looking at the security of cloud environments. Finally, you want to look at the location of the data stored in. Oftentimes when you upload data to a cloud environment, the data gets uploaded and the provider figures out where that data is going to be stored. This provider could have data centers spread throughout the world, so you may not know if this data is being stored in the US, Europe, Asia Pac, other areas. And this becomes critical when it comes to looking at sensitive data that's stored in that environment. For instance, if you have person identifiable information from European customers, there could be EU safe harbor and EU privacy laws that come into play if that data is stored outside of the EU. Additionally, if you have HIPAA, PCI data, or other type of sensitive data, you want to understand where that data is being stored because that can directly impact the regulatory requirements of storing that data in those other countries. Additionally, keep in mind that as data is stored across other countries, if there is a breach that occurs, you may need to involve law enforcement from multiple countries in order to actually investigate the breach. So keep this in mind when looking at a cloud provider and figuring out how they determine where the data is stored. In many cases, cloud providers can set it up so that if you do have a requirement that data only be stored in their US data centers, they can make sure that it only stays within the US or in the EU and so forth. Some will charge an extra fee for this, others just built in as part of the service. But either way, it's important to understand the data that will be stored in the environment and if there are any geographic constraints on it to make sure that that's taken into account with the final solution you select. Next up, we're looking at auditing, assessing cloud providers. In this case, we'll go through some common reports and audits and assessments that are usually performed or provided by cloud providers to show that they are securing your data. We'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of those different audits and assessments, and then go into the recommendation of what SecureState recommends in terms of assessments in this area. So the first one, when auditing assessing cloud providers, cloud service providers often provide third-party reports as proof that their environments are secure. Because cloud providers get so many requests for proof of security and compliance, they'll often have a third-party report, third-party perform an assessment or an audit, and then provide that report to individual clients to basically show that they have the proper controls in place. It's good to note that third-party reports can be a good step, but they are usually heavily controlled by the provider and tailored to very specific services. So they may not meet your individual needs, but they can be a good initial kind of litmus test of the provider to make sure, okay, do they have the controls in place that we need at a high level? Are they addressing some of our questions? But by all means, you still have the right to and should ask additional questions if needed. So based off these initial reports, usually it's a good starting point, but usually additional testing will be required before you're comfortable storing data in that cloud provider's environment. And with that, next section. First report we'll talk about is the Cloud Security Alliance's Cloud Control Audit. CSA is a free organization that basically, a nonprofit organization that provides forum to promote and best practices around cloud security. They provide a wealth of free products. Membership in it is free at this point to join, and they have a number of very good mailing lists and other information that's free to the public. Definitely recommend checking out the information they provide. One of the things they provide is the Cloud Controls Matrix, or CCM. And a CCM is basically a controls framework aligned to the Cloud Security Alliance guidance, which is basically divided in controls into 13 areas based off of different domains that CSA has created. Key thing here is in this basically framework, you can filter the controls that would apply to environment based off of different things, such as if it's a software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, if you're a service provider or client, what controls need to be in place, then as well as different regulatory requirements, so HIPAA, COBIT, PCI. So it's a pretty powerful tool to figure out what controls should be present in an environment based off of those different requirements. The control set and framework is available for free at the link listed below. So definitely recommend looking at that as a solution to look at. Now, based off of this, CSA also created what they call the STAR, which is a Security Trust and Assurance Registry. This is basically an online registry where cloud providers can complete either a CCM report or a CAKE report, which is a Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire, which is basically a list of questions that they feel individuals who are going to be using a cloud provider want to ask. So basically, providers can complete these reports, the self-assessment report, upload them to this portal. So if you're looking at a cloud provider, you can go here to download these reports and basically get a feel for what controls are in place in the environment. A key thing here, definitely with a CAKE is a good first step, but basically gives a first blush of kind of what is in the environment. You'd still want to definitely drill down into further testing, further remediation. Now, the one thing we've seen with CSA, both the CAKE and the CCM reports, is although it's a very good framework and a lot of work's been put into making it very robust, we have not seen it really applied in too many environments, which is a challenge when it comes to actually finding which testing methodologies you used against a provider you're going to be doing business with. CCM provides a wonderful framework, but it's just one we really haven't seen quite really adopted by the industry yet. Another report providers may provide is a SAS 70 report. And this one's kind of interesting because it's actually not a good fit at all for cloud environments for a number of reasons. A little bit of history. SAS 70 was originally founded in 1992 to address concerns surrounding hosted systems, specifically related to systems that are hosting financial processing. It is an IACPA standard. There are basically two types of SAS 70 reports, Type 1 and Type 2. Type 1 just looks at the design of the controls. Type 2 actually tests the effectiveness of the controls as well. But the key here is it was designed to focus on financial reporting systems only, so it had a very thin focus. Because there was no other standard like it at the time, it did get applied to other systems as well outside the financial reporting area, but again, that was kind of bastardizing the report. So it's not a good fit for that, but it's also not a good fit because it's a deprecated standard at this point. Since then, the SSA 16 report frameworks have come out, which we'll discuss in a second, which are modernized versions of the SAS 70. And again, it was never meant as a general IT audit for general IT systems, but was applied to them. So really, a SAS 70 report, if a provider provides it to you, should never be used. It's deprecated and does not apply to most environments. So if that is something that's provided, that should be a red flag that the provider's not really up to date on what is necessary to provide. So the SAS 70 was replaced by the SSA 16 reports. And with these, there are SOC 1, 2, and 3 reports that vary depending on their needs. Basically, SSA 16 stands for their Statements of Standards for Attestation Engagements. They're designed to audit service providers, service organizations. So if you get a service from a third party, an SSA 16 audit could be an applicable audit to perform against those systems. And in this case, with cloud providers, it is a very good fit in some regards. There are 3 types of reports. The SOC 1 report, which is basically the SAS 7 report, just slightly modernized. Again, it focuses on controls over financial reporting systems. So if a SOC 1 report is provided by a cloud provider and your application that you're going to be hosting there to servicing and being for them is not related to financial reporting, it's not really a good fit. They're not applying the right standards. To address that, SOC 2 was created and basically covers matters outside of internal controls over financial reporting. So this can cover general IT systems. Broken up to a number of domains, I can focus on security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. And the key is a SOC 2 report can basically pick and choose which of these the provider feels is important in that environment. So it's important to understand the scope of what's covered during that audit. With these, there's also Type 1 and Type 2 reports. Type 1 is, again, looking at the design of the controls, and Type 2 is testing the effectiveness. So if you are provided with a SOC 1 or 2 report, make sure it's a Type 2 report where some actual testing has been performed to make sure that the controls are actually effective and not just designed well. Finally, there's a SOC 3 report, which is basically a watered-down version of the SOC 2 report that's designed to be provided publicly. SOC 2 and SOC 1 reports often contain information that is sensitive and should not be publicly posted. But they found a number of individuals were posting the old SAS 7 reports on their websites as proof of compliance. Usually this contained information that really should not be publicly posted. So to address that, they created a SOC 3 report, which basically gives a high-level overview of the findings of a SOC 1 or 2. Generally, SOC 3 is a good to look at. If you're looking at a provider, they send over the report. You can read over, see if that at least makes sense, and if it does, when you go to further next steps, the next step there would be to ask for a SOC 2 or SOC 3 report to really get into the details to understand what was tested and what's going on. Another standard that see applied to cloud environments, it's up-and-coming standard which we see being applied more and more is the FedRAMP standard, which is the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. And basically, FedRAMP has been established to provide a standardized approach for assessing and auditing cloud environments and services and products specifically for the federal space itself. So FedRAMP provides security authorizations and continuous monitoring of shared resources that can be leveraged by agencies both to reduce their security compliance burden and provide them with highly effective security services. So basically providing a standard that federal services should use when evaluating cloud providers. It is based off of NIST 853 Revision 3. And at the bottom, there's a link to where you can find more information on FedRAMP itself. Now, a couple of notes with any of these audit reports. If they're provided to you, how should you use them? Some of these may seem obvious, but a lot of times we find people get the reports, and just the fact they have a report, they feel the provider must be doing everything they need to do. So the key, number one, obtain and read the reports. Seems pretty basic, but again, we've seen cases where that doesn't always occur. Next, you want to document and review of the assessment, review and assessment of the report. Next, you want to coordinate this review of the in your assessment with the service organization. So as you have questions, you want to make sure you're able to ask the service organization, have an open dialogue back and forth. Because as you review the reports, questions will emerge. Key area is also understand the deficiencies listed in the report and how they impact the organization. Every organization, no matter how good they are going to have deficiencies where they are not necessarily meeting the security standards or requirements that they have set forth for the environment. So it's critical to make sure you understand what those deficiencies are and how they're addressing them and if they impact your environment. It could be something where the deficiency doesn't impact you based off the services they're providing. It could be a case where the deficiency would impact you. You want to make sure you have a timeline for remediation. Next, make sure the proper report was provided. We've seen cases where SAS 7 reports are still being provided, which are, as we discussed earlier, completely deprecated, not a good fit in any form. We've also seen cases where SOC 1 reports have been provided for cases where it does not involve financial reporting systems. So it's, again, important to understand to make sure that they're providing the right report so you then have the right information to analyze. Next, you want to verify the scope of the report to make sure it covers the services that the service provider will be providing you. Oftentimes, basically with any of the reports, the service provider sets up, here's the scope of this audit. Here are the systems that are going to be looked at. Here are the processes that are going to be looked at. You want to make sure those are the same systems and processes that you'll be utilizing from the provider. If it is not, the provider may not have the same controls, protections in place on the service you're achieving from them versus the service that they were audited, the audit was performed against. So it's critical to understand the scope of the assessment as well. Also, make sure you understand the controls in the report and make sure they're appropriate to the service that you're being provided as well. So oftentimes, for instance, with a SOC 2 report, the provider can look at various areas. So the provider could decide to look at the security, integrity of the environment, but not the availability of the environment. Depending on your service you're getting from the provider, availability may or may not be a concern. But either way, we want to make sure that the scope of the controls that are tested are appropriate to the environment so that you ensure that you get a full picture and basically all of your needs are addressed at least initially by those reports. And finally, as we made note of before, oftentimes it's good to start, but additional audits are often required to be able to gather those requirements. Another key factor here is oftentimes reading these reports is very difficult. So do not be, do not hesitate to engage an expert. If you're unsure how to interpret the results, definitely engage an expert to make sure they're being interpreted correctly. So the last thing you'd want is to review the report, think things look good and appropriate, go with the cloud provider, have a breach occur and find out that you misread the report, misread the controls, and did not fully understand what all was going on there before you stored your data with them. Well, next up, we'll look at what are SecureState's recommendations for assessing your cloud provider. Basically, we recommend going with a gap assessment using a FedRAMP standard. Looking at the standards that were discussed before, we feel that FedRAMP is really the best standard in this area for a number of reasons. First of all, since it's being required by the federal government, we're going to see more and more cloud providers are going to start doing FedRAMP audits. So it's going to become the de facto standard for auditing cloud environments based off of that. The CSA CCM has been around for a while. Good standard, as I mentioned, a lot of work was put into it, but we really haven't seen that take off as the standard that providers use. Additionally, SOC 2 reports can fit, but again, we haven't really seen that be adopted as the standard for cloud providers. Also, ISO, some of the ISO standards could apply as well, but really, again, none of these have really taken off. With FedRAMP and the backing of the federal government behind it, we feel that's going to be the standard that is going to take off in this area. We recommend doing a gap assessment against it just to basically make sure that review the controls that are in place, review their processes, to make sure that we can then get a map out of the territory, map out the controls that are in place to make sure that they fit your needs. Again, we find the gap assessment works well, at least as a first step, because it can be often quicker to get results, and that can then outline what additional testing may be required, because there could be additional testing in terms of penetration testing, data flows, other areas that need to be provided. Another key factor is the FedRAMP standard does require a high-risk risk assessment be performed, which is something that some of the other standards often miss, or at least when they're implemented are often missed. And it's critical to do a risk assessment to figure out, based off the data that is being put into the cloud environment, what sort of risks could be present and what are appropriate steps to mitigate those risks. Next up, we'll look at basically the other key here is penetration testing of cloud environments. We've seen oftentimes when FedRAMP gap is performed against an environment, you also need to do some technical validation to make sure that although the controls are properly being applied, to verify if the controls are properly being applied. Penetration testing of the cloud is a great way to basically verify this, see how the cloud provider reacts when they come under directed attack, and make sure that basically when the rubber meets the road of implementing these protections are being implemented properly. And really, penetration testing the cloud is really no different than penetration testing a non-cloud service. Despite, there's some people out there that have branded specific cloud penetration tests. Really, the attacks, the techniques are all the same. There are a couple of caveats. The big one is you have to make sure you have written permission from the cloud provider before this testing is performed against them. The client can often not give permission on their own to test the cloud provider's application. Oftentimes, the client and the cloud provider need to provide that permission. And there could be some strings attached in terms of rules of engagement that would be a little unique based off of cloud environments to make sure that things are properly being tested. So the next step is to make sure clear rules of engagement are defined. With this, define what systems are in scope. Many cloud providers will not let you test all parts of their infrastructure because they may not want to have parts that they consider their secret sauce be exposed to outsiders. So figure out ways to test as much of the environment as possible, or sign NDAs, other agreements to allow you to test those sections without giving necessarily all the details to the end client. Additionally, figure out how your testing will only focus on the client's applications and data. In some cases, we've seen cloud providers stand up separate instances of test data where the pen test could be performed against that environment. In other cases, they will set up dummy companies, dummy accounts that can be used to test to ensure that only the target client's data is tested. Finally, define what type of testing should occur. Is it going to be restricted to web application layer? Is it the entire network? If a breach occurs through a web application, they get onto the internal network of the cloud provider. Can the test perform from there, or does the test need to stop? Is social engineering in scope? Are other items like that in scope as well? And then define the restrictions of the testing. Are there hours restrictions? Are there specific addresses that can be tested against only test addresses during certain hours? So it's important to define these items with a cloud penetration test of the cloud. But again, there's really nothing special about these penetration tests. You need to make sure there's just a little bit of extra work done in the rules of engagement and making sure you have the right authorizations in place. So with that, we'll turn it over to questions. And basically on the website where this video is posted, there is a comment section. If you have any questions, please post your comments there, and we will reply to them as soon as possible. Thank you for your time today.